All right, Derek, we are here to talk today about a topic that all millennials love.
Oh yeah, it's got to be everyone's favorite. So I'm super jazzed to be talking about debt.
Debt, our favorite kind of debt, and that is student loan debt.
Ooh. Yeah, no one's favorite. Yeah, it's kind of high level. It's a real arbitrage, if I could talk correctly at a podcast, for a lot of folks. I see it in my line of work, obviously working with young folks and millennials. And I'm sure you come across this all the time when it comes to applying for mortgages.
All the time. And it's one of those things that we are convinced, and this is a millennial, probably a little bit of Gen X, all the way down to Gen Z kind of problem that is newer, is that we have been convinced at a young age that student loan debt is good debt. It's good debt. And that's what we're told. Yeah, you got to take those student loans out. Everybody needs them.
You need them. Why don't we kind of let's maybe dig into how do we get here? Because I think it should probably start with the boomer generation, right?
Yeah, well, and they are, I don't want to say the instigators of all of our problems. But if you notice, they are sometimes the villain of the Millennial Money podcast here. And it's not because they've done anything wrong to us. It's just the assumption that things have remained the same and the life that we're living is the same as the life that they're living is so wildly inaccurate. Wildly inaccurate. Right. So I think the first thing is, right, silent generation. They're like our first stop here on the student loan bus. They are born between 1928 and 1945. Okay. They went to college for like $200 a year.
Oh, sign me up for that. Yeah, that'd be great.
$400 a year. I didn't even buy books for $400
that was like,
a year.
That was like 3 weeks of pay back then. So you got to give them some.
Correct. And truthfully, with inflation adjusted 2024 dollars, that was like $2,500 to $5,000 a year.
So not crazy cheap. It wasn't like, 6 nickels.
Correct. It wasn't crazy, but it was pricey. Baby boomers. So baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. This was the first generation where a lot of people really started going to college. Okay. And the only thing that's different is they were often going to college with GI Bill programs. So this was the post-World War II prosperity. So we were still in a bit of a different life, but this is really where all of a sudden college became available for everybody. It wasn't just for people who were going to become a doctor or become a lawyer. More people were going to college.
Not the non-specialty jobs.
Exactly. They were paying $5,000 to $1,500 a year. But again, inflation adjusted, that was $4,000 to $12,000 a year. Okay, so not cheap.
Well, that's all right. So I'm going to interject here for a second because my dad used to have this conversation with me all the time. He's like, hey, I paid for my own college. And you know what he did? He worked at Stop and Shop.
Yeah.
Part-time.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different.
So go ahead. Sorry.
Gen X, okay, this is really where we start to get into it, right? Because Gen X are our fellow brethren here with the millennials, is where we've been rowing the same boat for a long time. Gen X, they are 1965 to 1980, and they were paying $1,200 to $3,500 a year for a public university, which in today's dollars is $6,000 to $18,000 a year. That's not markedly different than what millennials were paying. Millennials were paying $7,000 to $20,000. What really did change, though, is college tuition really began to skyrocket during this time. So this is where it went. And part of why it began to skyrocket was twofold. Is number one, costs to go to college became more expensive, but also there became more options.
Well, I mean, you got to think about it. If we kind of step back, not to be political, but I mean, this is both sides of the aisle. They said, hey, we need to get more kids educated. And the way we do that in government always is let's throw more money at the situation. So the more money is, let's make loans available.
Yes. So you're not just paying out of pocket, because just like cars and houses that everybody used to buy them in cash, you used to buy your college degree in cash too. Mm-hmm. And the other piece to that was the vast majority of baby boomers and before were going to local universities. Okay. They were living at home. They were often working full time while they were getting these degrees. You were not moving away from home for 4 years to go have like fun in California, right?
Yeah, you weren't going to, Arizona to party for a while, then come back.
Well, and college at that time was considered job training. It wasn't considered part of the American experience. And that I think is like a really marked difference, is that college became a thing you had to do to become an adult, to mature, it was an experience that everybody had a right to, right? Like, I get to experience college.
Well, then it became, because the demand went up because of basically all of our parents are saying, hey, look, you've got to go to college. It's the only way to get ahead in life, right? So we have this whole generation of parents teaching us, hey, you've got to do this thing. So now we have a whole generation of kids going, oh, I guess I have to go to college now. So now the competition explodes for this. So every school now is spending money developing buildings, right? And they're having
amenities, sports teams, dorms.
Wait, this one has a hot tub? I'm going to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, the country club aesthetic. That
right.
And college also between Gen X and millennials became a status symbol for parents. And that's the other piece that we don't talk a lot about with student loans is the status symbol of where your child goes to college and whether or not they're going.
Yeah, you're only getting Western Union State.
Oh, you're going to go to your local. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're going to the local university. And that actually becomes even more apparent between millennials and Gen Z is that so first off in the millennial generation, we're the 1981 to 1996ers, the cost of college rose so much that it outpaced inflation during that span. Yep. It also outpaced wage growth. So this is really where we started to see students taking on significant student loans. And also millennials were more often than not first generation college students. Where Gen X, if you were going to college as Gen X, you probably had educated parents. That changed from Gen X to millennials. You were often a first generation college student. I am exactly one of those. I am two parents who did not go to college, first generation college student. And what sort of happened at that time was, I don't think they were predatory at the beginning, but student loans became available and they were being given to non-college educated parents saying, yeah, just have your kids sign up for this. It's going to be worth it. They're going to get their degree. And that was really like when the tide shifted.
Yeah. It's like don't you want better for your kids? This is the way to do it. Hey, just get to college. You'll make more money. By the way, here's this loan. Please sign this paperwork.
And blue collar parents who, again, non-college educated, were like, yeah, I don't want you to do the things that I did. That sounds great. Where do I sign on the dotted line? And then the student loans happen. Now, Gen Z, they're the 1997 to 2012s. This is really where it's gotten crazy. But it's also where people started to realize it. So millennials are in like a lousy kind of span where Gen Z faced the highest college costs yet, right? Like Gen Z is paying more for college than we paid. Their student loans are worse than we are. But now there's more financial aid options and there's more discussions around financial aid at a younger age. Parents are more educated on student loans because their parents, a Gen Z's parent may be a millennial or a Gen Xer who has seen what has happened with these loans in their own lives. And there's now more national discussion, based on this. So that's kind of the progression of these student loans. Now we're going to focus on millennials because that's what the show is about. But don't think that we don't hear you, right, Gen Z and Gen X, because we're rowing the same boat with you that this is a problem, and it's not talked about enough from the standpoint of how is this actually impacting you. There's a lot of stuff in the media right now like, oh, just pay off your student loans. You took them out, you pay them off.
Yeah.
But it's not as easy as that.
Right. Well, I pay my debts off, but you know what? Like also you have bankruptcies for a business, right? You have, foreclosures for a mortgage. You don't have any of those options. Like you have to pay these loans off.
Yep. Or you're waiting for someone to forgive them for you. And that's the other piece of this. So one of the statistics that I found in sort of researching this, and it's the one that literally made me want to cry, and it is that 62% of millennial debt is their student loans. So if you think, right, you've got 100% of debt, these are your credit cards, your car loans, your mortgage, more than half of the total debt you hold is probably within your student loans.
Yeah, that's tough because that's a significant part of your liability.
It's significant. And so just some fun facts. By age 30, the average student loan debt is usually around $40,000. And by age 50, it's around age 30, it's $40,000, and around age 40, it's $50,000. So $50,000.
Now, how can that possibly go up? Because I get this question all the time. I've been making payments for 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, and I have more money in student loan debts than I had before.
Yes. So most people are signed up for payment plans that do not amortize. Okay. And what does that mean? So if you think about a mortgage, and I'm the mortgage lady, so we're going to go back to mortgages, and you have a 30-year mortgage, your payment by the 360th payment is zero. So when you pay off your final mortgage payment, you don't owe any more money. The interest plus the principal divided by 360, whatever you're paying, that will pay off the debt that you have. Now imagine, so let's round it out. Say that's $1,000 a month, and in over 360 months, you're going to pay it off in full. Imagine you're only paying $50 a month. When you get to 360, you're not actually going to pay that debt off. You're still going to owe money. And that's exactly what a lot of millennials have done, and Gen Z and Gen X, but millennials specifically have done with their student loans is they go on these income-based repayment plans. And there's a lot of names for these type of payment plans, but IBR is the most popular one. Yep. And it was pushed at us a lot, especially like 20 years ago. I was on and I'm like totally one of those people. I was on an income-based repayment plan. I didn't make a lot of money. And when I was told, oh, hey, Kelly, you need to consolidate your student loans, go on this website and like pick an option. I had no idea what I was doing. And I looked at the options and there was like a 10-year payoff, a 20-year payoff, an income-based payoff, all these things. I picked the one with the lowest monthly payment.
As most people probably would.
Like everybody does that, right? And I was paying like $20 a month on these things. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to pay a lot of money on them. $20 a month sounds great. But the problem with that is not only was that $20 not paying any principal off, it wasn't even covering the interest that was accruing. So you are now paying interest on interest, right? You are now, the total principal is growing instead of decreasing. And so you oftentimes hear stories from people who, took out $30,000 in student loans. 15 years later, they've paid $50,000 off, and they now owe another $50,000.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like you're in a boat, it's sinking, and then you're trying to use a little tiny cup of water to take the water out of the boat.
Yeah.
Like, the more money's coming in, more water's coming in that boat.
Well, so this sort of thought that like, oh, just pay your student loans off. We have. Millennials have. We've paid, and I should have gotten those stats, but there are statistics that like the millennial generation has paid down triple what they actually owed. So this is not the college who's not making their money. They made their money. Mm-hmm. It's actually the student loan servicers that, and people are like, well, if they forgive your loans, who's going to pay for it? It's already been paid for.
Yeah, in most cases, they paid it more than double over.
Exactly. Right. It's already been paid for. And that theory is just like credit card theory, right? It follows the same lines. If you're paying 30% interest and your item was $50 and you've now paid $250 on that $50 item, it's been paid for. You didn't get the item for free.
Right.
You paid for it. Somebody else just made a lot of money on it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one expensive $50 item. All right. Well, why don't we get a little bit of the different types of loans we have available? Right, because that's probably the overarching. Okay, like what am I taking out for a student loan? Do you want me to go through these?
Go through those.
All right. Well, there's a lot, so hold on to your butts here. All right. So there's basically direct subsidized student loans, and those are typically needs-based, and the government pays the interest on those while you're in school. There's direct unsubsidized loans. They're not need-based, and interest actually accrues. So you're a freshman. You've got 4 years of loan interest accruing, because you don't have to typically start making your first payment until 6 months after you graduate.
Right.
So that's 4.5 years of accruing interest from the start of the loan. There are direct plus loans, and those are typically for grad students or parents of undergrads. So if your mom and dad want to help kick in, but they don't want to, they want to actually take a loan out, that's where that would come into play. And there's consolidation loans, and that's where they could basically, can combine 10 or 12 loans. Because as I've noticed working with folks, you don't just have a loan, you have 13. I think I've got a client with 26 or 27 student loans. Mm-hmm. It's kind of comical. And then there's also private loans. So you can go to a bank and say, hey, look, I'm going to a school. Can I get a loan for this? And they'll happily give it to you because they know how this stuff works. So that's kind of the gist of the student loans. And they're not to be confused with donations or grants that you get. These are, hey, loans. I'm taking a loan out. You have to pay this back.
Well, and private student loans are very interesting because a lot of times you're getting those private loans from the university or college that you're going to, and you don't always even realize that it is a private loan. So when you get your financial aid package, you'll see, okay, you were awarded 1 unsub loan, 2 sub loans, your parents got a Parent Plus loan, and then here's another, and they don't call them private student loans. It'll just have like a loan name for $10,000.
Right.
And you're just kind of like accepting yes, like check. Yeah, I'll take all these because this is what covers my tuition. And people don't really always realize the difference. And you might say, well, why don't I just take out more subsidized student loans? Because you're only offered a certain amount of those. And you also would think unsubsidized loans, right, where interest is accruing, why would the government do that to me? Because the government someone's going to sell this loan off, my friend. Like they're going to make their money on it sometime because they have to, because somebody else is, just like with a mortgage, like isn't going to pay theirs.
Well, because they want to check off the box. Yes, we made college more accessible to you.
Exactly. Not affordable, accessible.
Accessible. That's the key difference there. And I think that's, you kind of brought up a good point. Maybe I'll take a quick aside because I think it's really important to, when you're looking at colleges and sitting down with your kids, so you Gen Xers listening, you're probably going through this process now, is really educating them on the packages that are available. A lot of times we look at private schools and say, oh my God, this private school is so expensive. And I'll kind of give you an example from my life because I applied to 3 colleges. I got in, not because I was
3 colleges.
3, yeah. I was very, so I applied to UConn because I'm from Connecticut, everyone does. I applied to Bentley and I applied to Bryant. I was lucky enough to get in all 3. My aid package from Bentley was a $1,000 loan. Cool. So it went from $35,000 to $34,000
Whoa,
with a loan.
Big spender.
Bryant, I believe, was $32,000. But they gave me, I forget the exact dollar amount, grant or private loan, not a loan, but a grant to go there. And it made it basically the same cost as UConn because UConn also gave me another $1,000 loan. I don't know what that number was about. But so basically when you're making the choice, I was like, okay, my number 1 was Bryant. But now it's affordable enough to me to make it go to like where it's almost the same cost as UConn. Okay, now I can go there because it's a similar cost. If I didn't get that grant, I was not going to Bryant.
Yeah.
So I made that decision earlier on. But a lot of people say, well, I love Bryant anyway. I'm going to go there because that's my number 1 choice. I'll take the loan out for the rest and I'll figure it out later.
Well, and it's the figured out later. That's what, like now I'm a grown up and I got to figure this out. And I there's not a great solution for it.
Yeah, I mean, is Bryant twice as good as UConn? I would argue no.
You're like, maybe not. Well, and that's, as you look at colleges. So I have a similar story to you, also from Connecticut. I applied to way more than 3 colleges, probably 15 colleges. I ended up going to a small private university as well for the exact same reason, is my small private university cost me less than if I was going to a large public university because of where I fell sort of on the needs spectrum, that I didn't need enough for a public university like UConn to give me a lot of money, but I needed enough for a small private university, and they wanted me enough to give me a boatload of dough.
There you go.
So I got a lot of dough. So it was cheaper for me to go to a private university than a public, but it still wasn't cheap enough.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd outside of maybe a couple schools for a couple specific jobs, no one really cares what your degree is from.
No one cares.
No one cares at all. All right, so I know our millennial audience is like, cool for the history lesson. We already have student loans. Can you help us out? What the heck do we do about them?
Yeah, what do we do with them? So I think the first thing to know for millennials is really, you are not alone, okay? So you are not alone. We know that because of how many of you have student loan debt. You're not alone. The second thing is, burying your head in the sand about your student loans is not going to help you. Okay. And I think COVID made it really easy to do that when everybody was in COVID forbearance for years, where like, I don't have a payment. And what was wild to me on the mortgage side is that the COVID forbearance was a blanket across the board forbearance. It did not matter how much money you make. You didn't owe anything during COVID. And it's interesting to me to see people's financial savviness, which I see now on the mortgage side. And what did they do during that time? Okay, what did you do? Did you continue paying on your student loans? Did you take that money and send it towards other debt that had a higher interest rate? Or did you just increase your living style based on you not having that payment? And the sad truth is, number 3 is probably what we most commonly see. Yep. That people had, cool, I don't owe that $500 a month anymore. I'm going to increase my housing expenses. I'm going to buy a nicer car. I'm going to do things. And that was all cool until those payments came back.
Yeah, I remember that time when they came back. Clients were like, I haven't really been used to paying this now. How do we decide to reevaluate a lot of people's cash flow just to figure, okay, how do we fit this $500, $1,000 monthly bill in? Yeah,
and while it wasn't necessarily accruing interest during that time, it wasn't getting any smaller.
Right. I mean, so that was kind of a golden opportunity to say, hey, look, my payment's $500. I could have put $200 a month against it. It's still been up $300, and I was chipping away at this debt that was not accruing any interest at the time. So that could have been a huge opportunity for someone to say, hey, look, I'm going to be diligent and pay this down over time and really, take advantage of the lack of interest there.
Absolutely. And I've had some clients that did pay them down aggressively or paid them off during the COVID forbearance because it was a time where you could get ahead. Now, if you did not do that, don't think that I'm calling you a dope, because part of why they did that was because COVID did have unique financial issues, especially for millennials, right? We had childcare issues, we had healthcare issues, we had a lot going on.
Housing went through the roof.
Housing crisis. But I think that's really what came out of the back end of this, is that you had this period of time where you didn't have the payment. You felt great. You came out of it on the other side into a hugely increased inflation economy, where not only do you now have to make these payments, but everything in your life costs more, right? Your gallon of milk costs more, your gas costs more, your car costs more, and your house costs more. So what do you do? So I think the first thing for everybody is, if you have the ability for student loan forgiveness programs, right? The public student loan forgiveness program, you should be attempting to qualify for it. Okay.
Yeah, I would 100% lean into that.
And a lot of people don't realize that they may qualify for them. People in education and healthcare, there's a lot of jobs. I will tell you, the rules around public forgiveness are complicated, convoluted, and lousy. You have to know what you're doing. You can't have missed a payment. They're very picky, but you should research that. Anyone else who does not qualify for public student loan forgiveness should probably stop betting on student loan forgiveness.
Yeah, I would say err on the side of it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. We have been promised and taken away a million versions of public student loan forgiveness. Some people it'll come alive and you'll get it for 3 seconds. And if you enrolled during that exact time, yours got forgiven. And then 3 weeks later, the courts overrule it and it's gone again.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick governmental note here. I mean, it's basically if a president is signing an executive order, assume it's going to get shot down by the courts.
Correct. And
So
it may
has to pass through Congress and be signed by the president. Then I would say, okay, it's definitely going to be a little bit more finite.
Yeah, it may scooch in. The other thing that you have to do is really look at these, unless you have consolidated all of your student loans into one loan, which most people are not actually doing. No. It's not as common as you think it is. You may have done consolidation, but if you open up your student loan website and you still see those loans listed individually, they're not consolidated into one loan. You're just paying them as one payment.
Yeah, you're going to see 13, 14 different loans.
And that's how we see them on your credit report. All as separate debts. Is you should be looking at those and try, and again, the student loan servicers do not make it easy. You should be trying to figure out what is the interest rate on each of those loans, what are the payments, and you have to figure out how to amortize these loans, how to pay them off in full, whether it's through bulk payments where you're making one large payment, whether it's through increasing your monthly payments, what it might be, but you really should be trying to pay them off, because the people who are now in the most trouble are the people who didn't pay during COVID. They're on an income-based repayment plan, or they were on one before, and they're still in a non-amortizing loan program where whatever they're paying a month is not enough to actually pay any principal down on these loans.
Yeah, you want to be chipping away at these loans.
You need to be getting to your principal.
Yeah, so I think, along those lines, I would say definitely go through the lane of discovering if you can have forgiveness, because one of the mistakes I've seen, I had a client come in and she was paying it forever, and she's like, oh, I got a really good rate because she consolidated her loans through a private, servicing company. But then that disqualified her from getting forgiveness.
Yep. And that's very common.
Very common. The banks are not going to tell you, hey, if you do this, you will lose your forgiveness options, because they want to get their money. It's all about money, right? It's
correct.
At the end of the day. So be very careful. If you think you're on track for forgiveness, make sure you are on track for forgiveness before you do anything else.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. And same with if there are some jobs where, maybe you're making a little bit less money, but you are able to get one of the public student loan forgiveness programs, and you're like, oh, but this job in the private sector will pay me a lot more. You really have to do the math to figure out, cool, they're going to pay you $15,000 or more a year, but you have $100,000 in loans on the line here, and maybe you've only got 2 years left. Right. You have to weigh that, and it's always the conversation of what's worth more to you, cash on hand or cash over time. And I ask that question to borrowers in relation to mortgages.
Great question.
All the time. What's worth more to you? Cash on hand, cash over time. Student loans are a cash over time game that you're playing, and you have to figure that out. And again, I think especially millennials, we're just taught to put our head down and not worry about student loans. Just don't worry about them. Everybody's got them. Just pay them.
They'll go away eventually.
Yeah, it'll go away eventually. They're not going away.
Well, and all right, so let's talk about one more thing about forgiveness, because I know this is kind of going back and forth with the rules too, and this may change, but there used to be a time when the forgiveness was taxed. You may be on a track where that forgiveness is taxed down the line, so make sure you have the money available for that if that happens, because that could change down the line, so definitely be aware of that. But let's say, move on. Okay, let's say you've determined I'm not in a path where I can get my loan forgiven at all. What do we do next? So I think to Kelly's point, we really have to look at, all right, how are we actually paying this loan down? Are we just putting payments in? If you're on an income repayment plan, one thing I would look out, if you are getting married and you go from a single filer to a joint filer, you are going to now take in everyone's entire income on this repayment plan. So if you have a spouse, let's say you make $50,000, but your spouse makes $200,000, guess what? They're looking at $250,000 of income now.
Yeah.
So that's something you want to weigh with your accountant to make sure, okay, is the tax trade-off that I'm making going to help really significantly impact my my loan repayment policy? Because that could be a huge difference for a lot of folks. So definitely go down that road. But let's say once we get that off the table, I think it comes down to, we have all these loans. As Kelly mentioned, you don't have just one loan.
No, you got a lot of them.
The next thing I always do is for debt, look at the interest rates. Because you have some loans, I've seen some that are 2%, right? You don't need to aggressively pay those down.
No, but I have a borrower who had a private student loan that had a 16% interest rate. That's a credit card.
You're not getting that in the market.
Yeah.
I mean, so
it's terrible.
My general rule of thumb is if it's 5 or 6%, that's when you kind of want to start making the decision of, okay, do we start paying down the debt versus that? I mean, because you want to look at a couple of things. Yes, the debt's annoying. No one wants to have a student loan. Everyone's going to, do backflips once they pay off their loan. But you lose a lot of liquidity when you over aggressively pay down a loan because you can't get that back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Once that money's there, it's gone.
It's gone.
Right. So you want to weigh that too. So if you're saving up for other items like a house or a renovation or something, right? Is me putting an extra $200 a month into the student loan going to impact my liquidity?
Yeah. What does that look like? And I think the other piece to that liquidity as well is, looking at how your liquidity is going to change over time too, is we were talking kind of at the beginning of this about how millennials and Gen Xers are in a unique position where we're just hitting the cusp of, we still owe money on student loans, and we may have children that are also going to need to go to college. And how are you going to pay for that? And that liquidity is a piece of that conversation is, are you putting money away for their college? Should you be sacrificing your own student loans for their potential future loans? Like, you have a lot to weigh when it comes to these financial decisions. Yeah,
it's a lot. And, I would definitely prioritize, what you value in general. But then in kind of going into this, peel apart the loans. Like, let's figure out the loan that is 16% versus the 2% one. Then we kind of create a strategy around paying those off first over anything else. So I think the gist of this is we really want to create a plan that revolves around your values, your liquidity, the interest rates, and what you want to accomplish out of this, right? Because it's going to be a mix of all those three. I can't just say, hey, just pay this one down and you'll be fine, right? You want to look at all these different factors to really come up with a plan for yourself to figure out what's the best thing for you.
Absolutely. And, from the housing standpoint is, can you afford a house if you have student loans? Maybe. Okay. Yeah. Maybe. If you have reasonable student loans, it's probably not a problem. It's when you do start to get into the student loans that are in excess of $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, that can become problematic. So coming up with a plan early for those loans is very helpful. And it's also something that, this is where, and I know we preach a lot about this on the podcast, is, what people do have on your team. Is it the tax accountant? Is it the financial advisor? Is it a good mortgage lender? Who are you working with to help make these decisions and what you need to pay off first? But it's also a conversation about and I think you sort of said it before, is like, what are your priorities? Right. What's important to you? Is it, are you paying off student loans and foregoing retirement? Well, that's not really a great plan either. Yeah. You really have to balance all the things. And what I find is that the balance is the part that people are missing. You know what? If you have $250,000 in student loans, you're probably not also buying a $500,000 house and having a $1,200 a month car payment. Like, it's just that's where it stops working.
Yeah. And I get it, because that can be very emotional. I think we get into a thing of like, we've got to pay this down over everything else. And it's about finding that balance, because at the end of the day, you may shave off 2 years if you really aggressively pay for it, maybe 3. Like, what's that really going to do for your life? But if you have to sacrifice everything now just to pay something off for 3 years earlier, like, is that really worth it? Right. So I think that's something we have to weigh too. Yeah.
And I think the other piece of this to not miss out on is that I think millennials have learned a lot of really important lessons over the last however many years since we graduated about the detrimental impact of student loans. And sometimes they're worth of the degree that you're getting, the worth of the student loan. And I'm hoping that it is going to shift the conversations around education for our children.
Yeah.
And I know my husband and I talk about it all the time. For those who don't know, my bachelor's degree is in fine arts. I have an art degree. Yes, I do mortgages with an art degree, because you don't need a degree at all to do what I do. You need a license, but you don't need a degree. And I think that's part of the shifting conversations that we're having as a country, right? About, sort of have talked about, you know, when in our parents' generation, you had to graduate from high school. That was your barrier of entry into the job market. The barrier of entry is now this nebulous bachelor's degree.
Yeah. Unless you're in trade, you basically have to have a degree.
Yeah. And if you like go on Indeed.com, it just says bachelor's. Well, my friends, if you just need a bachelor's degree with no specific major target training, anything, then you're just being given an arbitrary line in the sand.
Right.
It's an arbitrary line in the sand. That's not saying that you've learned anything. It's really just sort of a socioeconomic barrier that do you come from a family that's wealthy enough that got you one of those?
Right. Yeah.
Because that's what it becomes. You know, so what do those conversations look like with our children? I do think, and we are already seeing it right now in the United States, that community colleges are booming post-pandemic, that people are realizing that like, hey, I could save a lot of money on student loans if I went to community college for 2 years and then transferred to a 4-year university.
You still get that degree from that 4-year university.
Yeah.
After 2 years.
What does that look like? Or do I get my 4-year degree from a very inexpensive school and then I go on and get a master's degree in a more targeted topic in a program of choice? And I think these are conversations that we need to be having more and more often because the value of these loans and the value of your degree are just not aligning right now.
No, and I think you need to make sure that's number one. I think if you start from the beginning, that's probably, I'm sure if we asked all our millennial audience, all 5 of you guys.
The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision.